You're looking good, you who are 3 steps above average. I'm Kendall Brian Hunter. I am author of this book, Consider My Servant Job. It's a commentary about Job in the Old Testament. And son of a gun, we need this book right now with all that's going on in the world. The country is on fire. The world's on fire. And, whoops. There, I gave you something to look at. Everything is going crazy right now, so let's come together and see if we can make some sense of it. And today's title is Ice, the Warmth of Collectivism, and the Fires of Auschwitz. It's kind of heavy stuff. I don't know where to begin. I have a lead story, but just everything that's going on in Minneapolis and Minnesota is just dominating the news right now. So we all know that an immigration and customs enforcement officer shot and killed a Minneapolis driver on Wednesday during the immigration crackdown. And remember, contextualize this with the Somali fraud going on in the state. Tim Walz, who was running for vice president with Kamala Harris, is the eye of the storm, the nexus, the center of the spider web of all of this. For some reason, it ended up, or did it just happen? It's a sensitive issue. The best reframe or frame or explanation, I think, comes from the Reverend Franklin Graham, son of Billy Graham. He's Franklin Graham's head of Samaritan's Purse, a great charitable organization. If you got money, I recommend them. Franklin Graham is someone that we can work with. This is what he said on X. He said, "It is tragic that Renee Good was killed in Minneapolis yesterday. Pray for her family and loved ones. This incident serves as a strong reminder that everyone needs to obey law enforcement. If they tell you to raise your hands, raise your hands. If they tell you to get out of the car, get out of the car. Argue with them in court and let the judge decide who is right or wrong, but you should not take a chance of getting hurt. Pray for calm in Minneapolis and for our law enforcement who have the very difficult job of trying to get people out of this country who came here illegally under President Biden." Okay, that's absolutely perfect. He extends sympathy to the shooting victim. He loves both the officer and the victim. Perfect. That's absolutely perfect. You got to bookmark that and use that as a model when you have to, especially if you're in public speaking or in this type of career where you do that. That is an absolutely perfect framing, because it makes the point is, in a situation, bracket, you have normal everyday interaction with the normal people. This is not a normal you walking down the street on your way to the supermarket to pick up some milk. She's in a car. There's the context of the demonstrations of the quasi-rebellion of some of these governors and mayors against federal authority. You remember that Civil War thing? The question of illegal immigrants, the question of Somali fraud. That's all part of the spider web, and Tim Walz is the Black Widow in the middle of it. But he says express sympathy, and he points out that, yeah, you need to obey this in this context. You do what the police officer said. So we saw, when this came out, we saw a bunch of different clips. People were going, aha, aha. Finally, we saw the cell phone image from the ICE officer. And the taunting that goes on, it makes it feel conclusive that this person knew what they were doing. This is not some sort of out-of-control situation. This is someone who was behaving recklessly around police officer. The tiebreaker is just watch 5 episodes of Cop back to back and see what goes on in the TV show Cops. That gives you an experience about law enforcement. Another thing to think about when you watch Cops, I've kind of sporadically, sort of it's just need to wind down and do some couch potato type stuff. Watch how many times officers will put their knees on a suspect's neck to restrain them. That was a issue with George Floyd and Officer Chauvin, also in the same state. Like I said, this is the web of the spider. This is the center of the spider web. But yeah, when you're in an officer situations, yes sir, no sir, how can I help you, sir? We had January 6th, the J6 anniversary. So where's the insurrection? Where's the treason? Governor and mayor rebelling against federal government. The question is, how implicit are they in the Somali fraud? It doesn't look good. And this maybe Rahm Emanuel never let a good crisis go to waste. Are they using this crisis to get the diverted attention away from their complicity in the fraud? You have to find that out on your own, and you have to pay attention to what the courts find out. Rush Limbaugh, one of his undeniable truths was follow the money. When someone says it's not the money, it's always the money. I normally do an e-chapel and e-devotional at the end. I need to do something right now. President N. Eldon Tanner, he was a counselor in the first presidency to Joseph Fielding Smith, Harold B. Lee, and Spencer W. Kimball. He's a Canadian. He's, I think, Alberta, involved with the energy. And he said this in General Conference, October 1965. He said, some causes of juvenile delinquencies troubles are, 1, disregard for law in the home, B, lack of discipline in the home, 3, examples of adults, D, express sympathy for criminals in criticism of police, E, and last but not least, failure to accept Christ as Savior of the world and failure to keep the laws of God. So think about that. Replay that. Lack of respect for law, sympathy with criminals. Seem familiar? Speaking of sympathy with criminals, this is President Joseph F. Smith. He is the 6th president of the church. I mean, don't have your chat double check me. He was president of the church. He is the one. You have Joseph Fielding Smith, long name, short beard. Joseph F. Smith, short name, long beard. That's how you remember that. And he said this: there's a deplorable tendency among the peoples of this nation to sympathize with murderers, bank defaulters, evil adventurers, and 100 other classes of criminals who are at large, have been arrested or convicted for breaking the law. This sympathy for criminals is entirely abnormal and has a tendency to lower and destroy the moral sentiment of any people who indulge in it. For a Latter-day Saint to sympathize either with crime or with criminals is a burning shame. It is high time that the teachers of this community should stem such tendency and inculcate a sentiment that would make it extremely abhorrent to commit crime. Sympathy with criminals is burning shame, unnatural. Gordon B. Hinckley, this was from 2002 in General Conference. And he was talking in the context of 9/11 and people protesting. There's some demonstrators protesting supplies at various ports, I think in Oakland, California. So he spoke about that they're going to the military. I believe that God will not hold men and women in uniform responsible as agents of their government in carrying forward which they are legally obligated to do. It may even be that he'll hold us responsible if we try to impede or hedge up the way of those who are involved in a contest with forces of evil and repression. So that's the context of war, 9/11. How do you do this with coddling illegal aliens who are committing fraud? And remember, the fraud's in the millions and possibly billions of dollars. That's why the national debt and the deficit spending is so high, because of all this fraud. It's not just one state, it's everywhere. It's pervasive. And that's what's happening. It's collapsing the system. And it started out with Donald Trump and Doge and Elon Musk investigating it. And then this is I think the second wave of it, where we're catching on to the fraud that's going on. People who come here from other countries, we welcome them. They stab us in the back. So, of course, you forgive them, but mercy cannot rob justice. You always love your neighbors, even when they're picking their pocket. That doesn't make it picking the pocket good. Another sad story, shooting in Salt Lake City. This was in North Salt Lake, 600 North in Salt Lake City. And, of course, there's a funeral going on. It was a Polynesian, I think, Samoan family, and 2 people were killed. Now think about this. Churches are gun-free zones. Premise 1. Premise 2, when you have a active shooter, the policy is to run, hide, and then fight. So 3, in practice, what that translates to is an Indiana Jones scenario. You remember Raiders of the Lost Ark? Swordsman. Indiana Jones just stares at him and shoots him. And that's what you're getting into. You're asking us to bring a folding chair to a gunfight with this policy. There's time to rethink this. Things like this is why I joined the NRA. I intentionally held off joining the NRA for a long time, but once they start killing us, I have to join it. So, Let's take a little bit of a breather. This is heavy story. This is heavy things we're talking about. Murder, fraud, death, the spin doctoring, the spin cycle, twisting truth around like it was a spinner for a game of Twister. So lead story, the warmth of collectivism, the fires of Auschwitz. So when you hear the word collectivism, what do you think of it? Does it feel natural? Like collectivism is just taking care of your neighbor, loving your neighbor. That's the second great commandment. Looking out for your friends or coworkers, leaving those gifts on their door for Christmas and Easter or Hanukkah or whatever your holiday is. Or is there something more to this? Now, I'm going to explore this term collectivism in today's lead story. And I have to put it in this context of this model I talked about. I think it's Charlie Kirk and the Pink Elephant Effect, is where I introduce this, and I've had to refine it as you do with all things. So the model's a little bit different now. So you have the French Revolution, and there's this book here called The Social Contract. To ignore that, just pretend like it wasn't there, by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And he made this statement. Chapter 1, right there. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. Now, is that true? Is man born free? Think about that. Well, you wish it were, but what's the human nature? This idea that, and I'm going to talk about is collectivism and human nature. These think about these two blades on a helicopter. So the helicopter is going to lift us higher as we start thinking about this. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, of course, influenced the French Revolution. And the French Revolution, that's Tale of Two Cities or the Scarlet Pimpernel. They have this slogan, liberty, equality, fraternity. Liberté, égalité, fraternité, if you'll speak French. Liberty, equality, fraternity, collectivism. Those feel good. Of course, who doesn't want to be free? Equality, treat people fairly. Brotherhood of man. The Beatles used to sing about. That feels good, but how does it work out in practice? It certainly resonates with our higher and holiest aspirations, but French Revolution, where is the liberty, equality, fraternity, unless you're an aristocrat? What about the tyranny, cruelty, and atrocities of the French Revolution? How does that work into that slogan, that slippery slogan that slides into your ears and may not be the best thing for your heart? And fraternity, and that fraternity and collectivism, those are interchangeable terms. They're referring to the same thing, where we have this body, get people in a body together. So interchangeable. Mamdani, it'll be a struggle to say his name right. See that 2006. It's like changing the new year. It's going to take a while to get it ground in there. So he gives this speech where the frigidity of rugged individualism will be replaced with the warmth of collectivism. Fun slogan, but the French Revolution had a slogan: liberty, equality, fraternity. But what about the tyranny, cruelty, and atrocities? In the Book of Mormon, you remember the expression flattering speeches and fair promises. That, of course, came up all the time in the Book of Mormon. Is this French Revolution thing another one of those flattering speeches and fair promises? Here's another thing. So I made the point that the French Revolution went one way, and then the Declaration of Independence, which talked about rugged individualism, that went another direction. Now, of course, different language, Catholic, Protestant, there's some complexities there. They're not exactly interchangeable. You'll look at Canada. You have Anglophonic Canada, and they have Quebec. But American Revolution and the French Revolution, why did the French Revolution go so dark? I mean, can't we have this liberty, equality, and fraternity, this warm collectivism, and all the sunshine? And the question has to do with human nature. You can have a good model, a good system, a good theory, but does that include an accurate description of human nature? And what's human nature? Well, you have the scriptures. They talk about human nature as man as being fallen, carnal, sensual, devilish, lost, fallen. And that's why you need the Savior to atone for that. If you don't believe the scriptures, do you believe Shakespeare? If you don't believe Shakespeare, go back to TV, turn on Cops. What's the lesson about human nature when you watch every single episode of Cops? You have good guys, you have some bad guys, and the cops, they actually try and help them. It's not constantly arresting people. These police officers really want to help people. And sometimes that means putting them in handcuffs. And sometimes it means getting counseling. Once again, what was Jean-Jacques Rousseau's view of human nature that influenced the French Revolution? Born free and he is everywhere in change. Well, is he free? Well, no, he's fallen. There's this dark side of human nature. And it's interesting because that translates over into how you treat community or collectivism. If human nature is good, collectivism and fraternity works. If human nature is bad, you're getting a bunch of bad people together. And it doesn't work. And that's really the dividing line here is as long as you're naive and incorrect about human nature and human motivation, you'll always have problems. And let's get back to this model I was talking about. So the left is motivated by feelings, freedom, fairness, and friends. By feelings, emotion, sensation. You know, I'm looking out for joy. When you hear a conference talks and people talk about joy and goodness and gladness, that's going from that point of view. The problem with feelings is they're person localized. The idea with feeling is that you feel a certain way and you can somehow, because you feel a certain way, reality corresponds. And so you try and overwrite reality with your feelings. It doesn't always work. Case in point, human nature. Freedom, that's the individualism, unbounded energy, liberty. I think that's interesting because there's a structural tension. You can't have community and you can't have individualism. Those are opposites and they just don't work together. So freedom, that's unbounded energy, individualism, self-determination. You know, if I want to dye my hair purple and get a nose ring, I can go ahead and do it and you don't have any say-so. So feelings, freedom, then fairness, egalitarianism. You treat people fairly. Distributive justice, but it also involves equality of results. And the slogan from Animal Farm, all animals are created equal, or all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Once again, that sounds like how the French Revolution in theory and the French Revolution in practice. Lastly is friends. This is community. This is collectivism, socialism, be-ins, group therapy. But it also involves being other-directed and having social validation to your opinions. And I'm going to play a clip from Bill, or we're going to have a clip from Bill Maher called One True Opinion. There's also the danger, once you create a community, you always create otherizing. Well, if you believe in community, aren't ICE officers and the Somalis part of the same community, the global community? And you see how this attachment, the emotional attachment to slogans, and it starts banging up against reality and just stops working. Now, contrast, this is how person on the right functions. We don't base our ideas on emotions. At least those are a secondary thing. We deal with facts. In a courtroom, finding of fact, finding of law. What's the objective reality? And what are the universals, not personal relatives? Because you see, someone on the left will say, well, I have a friend of mine who feels a certain way. So let's try and universalize that, this other person's feeling. Well, that may be true for this one person, but where's the generalization and the universal in this? There isn't. You have to have a universal, the same law, a uniform law, the rule of law. It says that in the scriptures about the law of Moses. You have one law for the strangers, and one law for the Jews, one law for the Gentiles. You treat the poor and rich according to the same law. The second thing is function. As opposed to freedom, if you're conservative, you want to, I call it function. Now let me explain that. Compliance with truth, functioning according to this external moral code instead of a personal individual moral code, holding the iron rod instead of following your own compass, because sometimes compasses get out of whack from true north. They lose their magnetism. That there is an objective reality in there, and the best thing to do is to follow it. Francis Bacon made this famous quote about science: "Nature to be commanded must be obeyed." Nature to be commanded must be obeyed. That is, you follow the rules of nature or the moral rules, you work within those rules, you'll have success. Case in point, personal finances. You follow the rules of common sense personal finance that you learn from NerdWallet, Crown Ministries, Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman, Richest Man in Babylon. You follow those and you're consistent with those over the decades. You'll be financially prosperous instead of getting caught up with the emotion. And that's what it is. The danger of following emotion is you get impulse shopping. What's the latest stock pick? Well, now you just park in an index fund. Lastly is fidelity, contrasting with fairness. Now, fairness, that's the thing, is that's a universal standard, but when it translates into practice, it comes to equality of results. That with fidelity, mean your fidelity to the process, procedural justice instead of distributive justice, equality of opportunity, which is talked about in Alma 13. The end result is you get natural hierarchies, de facto rather than de jure hierarchies. You read about this in Abraham chapter 3, the different grades of intelligence. Or you're back to Shakespeare again, Troilus and Cressida. They have this long speech by Ulysses, or about there's an order in nature. That'd be a good thing to read. You have your chatbot look it up. Ulysses' speech in Shakespeare. That fairness for the left means distributive justice. Everyone gets the same slice of the pie. You lay in bed all day and you get the same amount of money as a person who goes out and busts their hump every day. For someone on the right, did you follow the rules? Did you follow the process? And so we use the same word, fairness, be for the end result or for the process. And that's where the confusion comes in. Lastly, friends. And on the left, it's friends. On the right, it's family. On the right, it's a natural, biological, social order. Now, of course, this is partially exclusive, that you work with the blood relations ahead of that. And I remember hearing a lady teaching Sunday school that, she was agonizing. There's this poor person over there. Should you buy your kid a Game Boy or something like that, or Xbox? Well, your family is your immediate stewardship, and other people are secondary stewardship. And you start otherizing your family, it creates problems. So always put your family first. The same thing with America first. If we take care of America first, we're not letting Somalis rip us off, or whoever else is ripping us off, because that can collapse the system. So in my judgment, and from my experience, Bachelor of Arts in History, I'm head of minor in political science. I served a mission in Portugal. I was in Russia 6 months after the Soviet Union broke up. So I saw where this stuff goes. When I was in Russia, this is just what you need to remember. In Russia, heard on the radio there's going to be a bread shortage, so you go to the bread store. The bread store is completely empty. Two guys are just sitting there. They look like they're in their late teens, early 20s, just leaning up, not doing anything. So the store was empty, and they did not have a cash register. They had an abacus. So you go back to America and you have this laser cash machine, laser checkout machines that talks to you versus an abacus. Okay, I don't need any of the further discretion. I saw it with my own eyes. I experienced it with myself. Where does the evidence take you? Which is a better accurate model of reality? Think about your political party as a scientific theory. Does it provide an accurate model of reality and success? So I like to talk about how this model applies to some of these three news stories. So Mayor Mamdani revokes executive orders that backed Israel. This is from the New York Times. Mr. Mamdani, a staunch critic of Israel and its treatment of Palestinians, knew from the moment that he won the election that he did not extend Israel-related orders, according to three people involved in deliberation. So three unnamed insiders repeating the same rumor. But his team also believed rescinding them would upset some Jewish groups that Mamdani spent months trying to reassure. So he eventually revoked them. Now to begin with, copy of the Quran, another copy of the Quran, third copy of the Quran. I actually own 5 copies of the Quran. Now, I take the Qurans as gifts. These are people who, Muslims, and I went to school with Muslims in California. They're not all terrorists and all Wahhabists. They want us to read them, and I'll take these as a gift, and I'll be grateful for them. I've read 3 different versions of the Quran. I actually own 5 because I need to understand their point of view, and it's important for me, just as a human being, to understand it. I'm also supportive of the Jews. Here is some Hebrew flashcards. Aleph Bet. Look how kosher that is. Spin that dreidel. Also, I'm supportive of the Jews. That doesn't mean I necessarily endorse everything that every single Jew does or support everything the state of Israel does, but I will support them as a people. And here's a copy of the Tao Te Ching. With a degree in history, you're just reading everything. So whatever point of view, I'll read it just to have some background and understanding. You have the Israel question. The state of Israel, is that a legitimate state? Well, all territory is occupied. Who did the Native Americans take it from? I served my mission in Portugal. Is it the Portuguese? Does it belong to Rome? Does it belong to the Celts? Does it belong to the cavemen? For some reason, people get locked into a position and they're impervious to data. Another thing, too, is with Jews, they have this saying in their Passover. Each year during Passover, they have this part of the ritual says this: "For not only one enemy has risen up against us to destroy us, but in every generation they rise up to destroy us. But the Holy One, blessed be He, delivers us from their hands." And that's part of the Jewish consciousness, that each generation has someone who tries to obliterate them. So double check your history. What does history say? And has that same thing happened to the Muslims? So the Jews have a very different experience. So I support both people. Read section 132. But think about in the context of what he's doing with the anti-Israel thing. It's someone who's a very young Muslim mayor. And Wokeness account had this tweet. We'll still call it that. New York City Mayor Mamdani, him again. Tenant Director Sia Weaver. We'll transition from treating property as an individual good to a collective good. Whites especially will be impacted. Well, wait a minute, aren't whites part of the community? And isn't that a double standard? Race-based double standard? That's not legal. That's strict scrutiny. Anyone 1L, anyone who's just watched TV knows that that's strict scrutiny. Why aren't whites part of the community? And this is another South Africa scenario again. This is where the community and collectivism leads. If you misunderstand human nature, Bill Maher. Okay, Bill Maher. He's an agnostic. He's a cultural Jew. He's sort of the new Rush Limbaugh in a way. I don't think he'll ever switch parties, but he calls balls and strikes. And Bill Maher said this phrase I've always used. One of my big complaints about the left has been the one true opinion. There is the one true opinion. When you deviate from that, it's so ironic that people who absolutely hate bullies so much are the biggest F-word bullies in the world, and they just want to bully you back into the corral. And well, you definitely can't do that with me. One true opinion. See, that's how you build that's how you build a community. You just have one true opinion. And you bully people, and you otherize those who don't follow it. And if you're emotion-driven and you're other-driven, susceptible to peer pressure, that whole collectivism they'll keep you in line. And to his credit, Bill Maher is willing to stand up, and he calls balls and strikes. This is the dark side of the leftist ideals. And it's just this error about human nature. If you get human nature wrong, then you don't need Jesus Christ and you don't need the atonement. If you get it right, second article of faith, they'll take you the right direction. Plus, you'll have a better political system. I did this in an earlier broadcast where I read from the Federalist Papers, and that America is the only country where they took a fall of Adam into account in the founding, human nature into the founding. Let's pause here right at half an hour. Cheers to Scott Adams. Trump, and on Truth Social, he had this post about some of the action in Venezuela. I don't think he put it together with someone else, so it's some of the invasion force, and they're playing the Creedence Clearwater Revival song, Fortunate Son. I saw that. It didn't like it. It reminded me too much of the movie Apocalypse Now. They have the scene where I love the smell of napalm in the morning scene where they have this beach, and it's interesting. Francis Ford Coppola, he was actually a war. He learned filmography in the army. He was in Vietnam and he filmed army stuff, if that's the correct term, is some of the action. So his stuff's actually accurate because he had the background. He really did it in Vietnam. But you see these Huey gunships coming in. They're playing Ride of the Valkyries from Wagner, Kill the Rabbit song, and then they're dropping bombs, and then I think it's Robert Duvall plays the commanding colonel, telephones in, they get some F-4 Phantoms to just drop napalm on this area while they're still playing Wagner. That did not sit right with me, because if there's people dying, it's not entertainment. So I'll call balls and strike just like Bill Maher. Secretary Kennedy, Make America Healthy Again, he updates the food pyramid, and apparently he had this, because you had the triangle, and he just flips it upside down, eat a lot of these fruits and vegetables. Apparently there's a South Park clip where they did the same thing, turn it over, and my response is, do you see this with The Simpsons, the predictive ability of The Simpsons? Yeah, pay attention to these comedians. So, Scott Adams, simultaneous sip. He was an agnostic, sort of a good-natured agnostic, live and let live, a bit like Penn Jillette. And so he's doing this podcast, and he's slowly dying. I have a hard time hearing him now. It's just hard to understand because part of his face is paralyzed. So I have to use subtitles to understand what he's saying. And he's having other people in to talk to. But as he's playing this, he said, he worked through this rational explanation. And I recognize it as Pascal's wager. I found 3 articles where he said the same thing. One was published in the Deseret News. One was World WNG. The other one was and Register at Catholic One. And it's interesting because this is what Pascal's wager is. Pascal, he is a mathematician. The computer language Pascal was named after him. The units of pressure, pascals, was named after him. He's like a Rene Descartes or Isaac Newton, a mathematician who's a person of faith. And so he came up with this argument. It's called his wager, or bet if you want to sound crass. And it's this. So G plus, God exists. G minus, God does not exist. You acknowledge his existence plus, you don't acknowledge his existence minus. So if God's exists, you acknowledge his existence, getting born again, etc. However you understand your version of Christianity, that's good. God doesn't exist, you acknowledge him. Well, you just acknowledge something that doesn't exist, a puff of hot air. But let's say God exists and you don't acknowledge him. Well, then something bad might happen unless you believe in the order of evil, where everyone gets saved. Let's say God doesn't exist and you don't acknowledge him. Nothing happens. You just fade away, and that's sort of the new atheist version. So Scott Adams said, look, but you look at what it's risk, eternal salvation and eternal life. Concerning all this, you have a 25% chance of getting it right. But considering the risk, it's just better to accept God in face of the uncertainty. Well, first of all, that's just not real faith. You have to do this with a real intent, not as some sort of a calculation. That's my understanding of Christianity. However, he may be doing the best he can, so let's just cut him some slack and not pester him about it. Yeah, this is a foxhole deathbed conversion. So we hope for the best, cut him some slack. I'll just quote this from C.S. Lewis. So he's not part of my faith, but he is a Christian thinker that's acknowledged as an authority. Said C.S. Lewis in Book of Mere Christianity, it is not for us to say who, in the deepest sense, is or is not close to the Spirit of Christ. We do not see into men's hearts. We cannot judge and are indeed forbidden to judge. It would be wicked arrogance for us not to say that this man is or is not a Christian in this refined sense. So I'll leave it at that. So, yeah, it's a deathbed repentance, but he may be doing the best he can. Not surprising news segment. Governor Walz announced he's dropping out of re-election. This was before the ICE shooting. he's sort of manning up now with this, but he is taking a stand against the federal government. You remember that supremacy clause thing, the Civil War? And just cannot disentangle this from the Smalley fraud. Just going, this is a corrupt stinkle. I always thought it was Chicago, but Minneapolis. And once again, what's your view of human nature? So here's a cultural comment. I put this in as I saw Avatar it was a week before last, or I can't remember, it's all blurring together. And one of the podcasters I follow, let me pause for a second. Welcome back. So one of the broadcasters, YouTubers I follow is The Critical Drinker. He's from Scotland, and he talked about the Avatar paradox. He said that these Avatar movies, he's talking about the first two, they make moolah, make bank. But there's a minimal cultural impact. I mean, you just don't have these quotables. You see it and you move on. A bit like my reaction to the Han Solo movie was. I saw it, ate my popcorn, and went home and tried not to worry about some of the contradictions from other materials I've read. But, you have Star Wars or The Princess Bride where people quote them, or Indiana Jones. They become cultural phenomenons, but these make a lot of money, but they just don't stick. So I saw a clip by Snarky J, and she had her podcast was called The Franchise the Internet Hates, but the World Can't Stop Watching. And she made the same point as Critical Drinkers that makes a lot of movies, makes a lot of money, doesn't make a cultural impact. But she made this point of view is first of all is that you have this the internet bubble of these people, the Critical Drinker and Overlord DVD, Dictor Doomcock, I think is his real name, and some of these other ones out there who really criticize the movies. I agree with them. To Star Trek, Star Wars, the MCU, how those has been trashed. It's just you're burning your filet mignon to an ash, screwing up these franchises I grew up with, and just imbecilic things they're doing. And it has to do with wokeness. But you made the point is why people are going to see this has to do with immersion. That's the term she uses. That it's the Ferngully plot, but there's an immersive aspect. People like entering this thing that there's. He did a lot of great world building. New languages, make sure the ecology and climate are right with these different cultures. And it's what the world building, the immersion in this world is what attracts them. And this would be the same thing with Terry Brooks. I really like him. It's not, the Shannara series is not well thought out as Lord of the Rings or as Avatar, but it is immersive. Orson Scott Card, the science fiction writer in one of his books, talked about what's called the mice quotient. That you have a story, it's one of four things: mice, milieu, idea, character, event. And this is a milieu story. Lord of the Rings balances all these things fairly well, and so it's very enjoyable. But this one, it's very shallow storytelling, but it's very great environment. And Snarky just makes the point is, it's what the environment's talking about. Plus, too, she had y'all guys were caught in a bubble, and so you're just repeating each other's opinion, and you have just one point of view, but it's not what the people want or people think. She made the point compared to the Fast and Furious movies. I've not seen one of those. I sort of understand the appeal. I like movies with machine guns, dragons, and robots, but Fast and Furious doesn't appeal to me. I should see at least one of them just for cultural relevance, but that's actually a good point. There's another point she made is a lot of the MCU movies, they use meta-humor. Meta-humors with Joss Whedon, with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They used a lot of it in Stargate SG-1, the self-referential humor. And MCU, it got overdone. It was a good idea executed badly. She made the point is like, look, this isn't, you're not trying to be cool. Said, we're not being self-referential about these movies with avatars. Said they're actually honest and they have a good heart. And I think, that's actually a good observation. So thank you, Snarky J. I did like it. It was a good story. You did notice the race placing, how all white people are evil. They did have the evil general who was female, but so thank you, Snarky J, for rounding up my opinions. Life's some pointers. We're getting near the end. we're about a weekend, it's 10 days into the new year. How are those resolutions and goals going? What's your system are you using to keep yourself on track? I use a Franklin planner. What's your system to keep on track? Whatever your holy day is, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, that's a good time to renew. Take a look, okay, am I heading the right direction? So remember, focus on systems rather than goals. So in year 2021, I turned 50, and what I did as a goal, I read an encyclopedia in a year, 40 pages a day. And that was a goal. Once you get done with the goal, what happens? You end up like Inigo Montoya. You've been in the revenge business so long, or reading the encyclopedia business so long, you don't know what to do with yourself. But a system is becoming an informed person with broad knowledge. So you have the system, you have the goal to implement the system. So you pay attention to the news, you read Harvard classics or great books of the Western world. Keep yourself informed, or just get the recommended book list. Go to your college and get the required reading list or the ideal class. They'll have some list about the basic class. You kind of know who they are, competing with all the latest hot seller books that come out, but the standard classics. So think about this. Is this a goal or a system you're working with, and what's your mechanism you're using to keep on track? 41 minutes. I can't talk this long. It's about an hour and a half is the length I can talk. I have sleep apnea, and when I was diagnosed, the nurse said they have about 4 widths. So you have a big one, which is kind of like Elvis or Bono or Celine Dion. You have a 2, which is a little bit tighter, a 3, and then you have a 4. I'm about a 3 width, so I just physically cannot bellow air out. But I'm going to close with the E. Chapel Devotional, quoting from a First Presidency statement from 1907. America, 250 years, the semi-quincentennial. Bicentennial just rolled off your tongue. I remember that as a kid. Semi-quincentennial, it's cloggy and ruckus and just doesn't glide off the tongue. So America 250 works. So I'm going to read this statement that the First Presidency issued in 1907. The Book of Mormon proclaims America to be the land of Zion, a land dedicated to righteousness and liberty, a land of promise to certain branches of the house of Israel and also to the Gentiles. It declares that God will fortify this land against all of the nations. He that fighteth against Zion shall perish. By revelation to Joseph Smith the prophet, the Lord declared that he had established the Constitution of the United States through, quote, wise men raised up unto this very purpose. There's also our belief that God has blessed and prospered this nation and given unto it power to enforce the divine decrees concerning the land of Zion, that free institutions might not perish from the earth. Cherishing such convictions, we have no place in our heart for disloyal sentiments, nor is there a likelihood of treason in our conduct. Were we evil-disposed towards American institutions or disloyal to the United States, we'd be recreant to those principles to which by interest and education we are attached. It would repudiate the revelations of God concerning this land. In reaffirming our belief in the high destiny of America, our attachment to American institution, and our loyalty to the United States, we declare that these sentiments, this loyalty, have outlived the memory of all the wrongs inflicted upon our fathers and ourselves. The exterminating order. If patriotism and loyalty are qualities manifest in the times of peace, by just, temperate, benevolent, industrious, and virtuous living, in times of trial by patience, resistance only by lawful means to real or fancied wrongs, and by final submission to the laws of the land, through involving distress and sorrow, and in time of war, by willingness to fight the battles of the nation, then unquestionably are the Mormon people, the M word again, the saints are patriotic and loyal. So think about that. That's First Presidency 1907, called An Address to the World, Joseph F. Smith. Again, yeah, patriotism is part of our religion. So here we are at 44 minutes. Let me stop before 45 minutes. That's the passing scene with the eyes of faith.